Frank, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Right on. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So how did you first get into and develop a passion for MMA?
Well, it's solely by need and necessity. I always dreamed of being a world champion, a boxing champion, but I never really had any opportunities. Organically, when I was 21, I had totally screwed up my life and ended up in prison. And my group home dad, Bob Shamrock, was like, you can really put your body to work. And then this whole mixed martial arts thing opened up, and I just jumped into it and kind of committed my life to it.
So it's no secret you had a pretty rough upbringing. Some athletes deem that a requirement for athletic success. Do you?
I don't think it's a requirement. According to my studies, it's not actually necessary, but it does craft, incredibly focused and driven people. So there is some value in that. In the process, but it's not actually necessary.
And why do you think that is? Does it have something to do with natural aggression or anger or something that has to be redirected for beneficial purposes?
I don't think that. I think it's more psychological. I just think, like for me, I was always on the bottom. I never had anything. I was like, when the opportunity came, I was all over it. Like I even with my lack of education, like I got that this was, an opportunity. It made sense. Like if you connected all the dots, it made perfect sense. And not too many things in my life had made sense up until that point, or, were roadmaps of success.
And you mentioned the Shamrock Boys Home. How'd you end up there? How did it shape your life going forward?
Well, I was a troubled kid. I started breaking the law and getting in pretty good trouble about 8 or 9, which is right around time my brain turned on. And, by the time I was 11, I was awarded a state. That's when I went to juvenile hall for the first time. And it was just a big wake-up call. I was hanging out with the bad kids and telling them what was happening to me, and they were like, that's crazy. That stuff doesn't even happen to the bad kids. So I just realized I was living in a very dysfunctional, very damaging home environment. And, the counselors kept telling me, listen, if you keep doing this, we're going to take you out of your home. And I thought that was a lesson, to protect myself. So I just went crazy on breaking the law until they took me out, and then I used it as a tool. Anytime I didn't like the social situation, or I didn't feel comfortable, I didn't like the family or whatever, I would just break the law, and they'd send me to juvenile hall. And eventually I ended up in pretty high security, which is what the Shamrock Boys Ranch was. It was the last place they sent you before you went to youth prison. Like it was the last stop for the bad kids.
And what did they do there that was able to point you in the right direction, so to speak?
It was the family atmosphere for me. For me, it was the normalcy of being in a high security youth camp, in the country, because we were isolated up in the mountains. But it was the first time I'd grown up with 4 siblings, but it was always dysfunction, and we weren't close. So it was the first time where I was just invited to a family unit. I was instantly one of the boys. There was all these rules. They made sense, and they were enforced. And it was like, do good, get rewarded, do bad, see the opposite. And it was the first time in my life, even though it was, basically a high security work camp, it was the only place where it was family for me. And I got all the life lessons, dad lesson, brother lesson, social lesson, all the stuff I was missing and didn't learn because I was locked up all the time and living in these other environments. I learned there. And I think that's what a lot of us kids needed, was just some type of stable family unit, to kind of get us on our feet. And that's what allowed me to do.
And there you were introduced to MMA by way of the Lion's Den. What is that? What impact did it have on you?
Well, it was the first school, first martial arts school, first training place. It also happened to be, my adopted brother and kind of the beginning of all the mixed martial arts. but yeah, I mean, it was like right out of a movie. My dad like dropped me off a couple of days out of prison and was like, go get them and don't give up. I did the old school tryout, and then I joined the ranks and just trained. Made it my whole life.
And, objectively, you were a tough guy, just naturally. I've heard interviews where you said what you went through there was unparalleled to anything you could have ever experienced. Why was that?
Well, the whole, format was really designed to, just make you really tired and then, decide if you really wanted to, do crazy things like fighting. So it was very much a machismo-like atmosphere of toughness. And, the only requirement was that you didn't give up and that you were tough. That was like it. That was the baseline requirement for, entry. So that kind of bred this whole culture of like super tough guyness. And Ken was the toughest guy ever. It's extremely foreign to me because I wasn't an athlete. I didn't play organized sports, so I didn't really know what organized sports were like. And this wasn't really organized sports. This was something else. So it was just kind of this crazy world of extreme violence. And then I just took notes because it seemed like we should be, figuring it all out.
Why do you think that gym was so strong at the time in terms of it being the number one training facility in the world at the time for MMA or no holds barred or however it was classified all those years ago?
I was just Ken was the first mover. Ken had the info. Yeah, he had the info. He'd gone on the journey. He'd gone to Japan. He had more info than anybody else, and he was a very commanding, powerful person and figure, and yeah, I mean, they came from everywhere to try to follow in his episode to achieve what he had done.
So after you trained for a bit, you end up fighting as a professional in Japan in the main event in your first ever MMA card. What was that like?
Just crazy scary, like so nuts. I mean, it was crazy for me because I'd gotten right out of jail, like prison. Like I was in Folsom Prison, and then I went to camp, the next day, and then within 6 months, I was living in Japan training to fight, and my opponent was Boss Rutan. And everybody I said, hey, yeah, fighting Boss Rutan, they'd all just looked straight down, and like I could tell, like I was being shipped off to my death. Or at least it felt like that. So I just train. It's very lonely, very isolated, living in a Japanese dojo. And, the couple of Japanese, Sakunaki and Suzuki, took me under their wing, and I think they saw how scared I was. And they showed me some strategies and kind of rounded out my style, especially to match up against Boss's style. And then I just went for it. And, to be honest with you, the whole thing lasted about 5 seconds in my mind because it happened so quickly. But after the 10-minute match, I had beat him on the decision, the positioning and submission attempts and just general going for it.
And what was the effect of the Japanese crowd? You hear all these accounts saying that the people in Japan value the sport so much more. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. Well, they just have a different appreciation for it. And if you go back and you see, their roots of combat and then what they have as combative sports entertainment, they have sumo and they have judo and they have these very refined ideas of combat because they've been doing combat for a long, long, long time, as a society. So we're fairly new to the, social combat vibe. But over there, especially at that time, there was just tremendous participation and support. And, over there, they call it the game. It's how's the game? What's your game strategy? What's your plan? Because it's a over there, it's not a fight. It's a game between two players. And that whole mindset of supporting players and, watching a game play out. And I think that whole, idea of combative sports being more social. I think that's what really fires the fans in Japan. It makes them so, so good. Like the Japanese fans are the best because they remember your birthday. Like they really, fall in love with you and support you, throughout your journey.
And after fighting in Japan for a little while, a long while, he fought for a few other organizations, ultimately made it to the UFC. How did you make it over to the UFC?
I had done my first no rules fight against John Lover in Hawaii, and I'd lost that fight. And so I kind of did a reshift on my mindset and my strategy, and I took the game and turned it more into a fight. And then, right at that time, the UFC was getting kicked off cable and was really starting to, feel the effects of its marketing. So they were looking to develop weight classes, and I came on the radar as a good-looking young champion. After I fought TK in Japan, he was much larger than me. It was like a big guy versus little guy match, and I guess they really liked that. So I got a call which said, if you beat Ensign Inoue in your next fight, you can fight in the UFC against Kevin Jackson. And I was like, all right, well, I'm planning on doing that anyways. So that's what happened.
And it was so early on. Did you know that it was going to work? Nobody really knew, I suppose, but could you anticipate that it was going to turn into this worldwide phenomenon?
I mean, I did. And I, bet all the coin on it, because it just seems so amazing. Like, being at the base of it and watching it grow. For every naysayer and for every person who kicked us out, there was like 10 more that were like, this is extraordinary. Both as a television property and as a sporting element, and then as a social element. It was really connecting people. So I really felt like this. This sport was going to be what it is today. And I only hope when we got here that, the fighters would have, a pension, and there'd be, a stronger amateur league or an amateur league that's developed. And, my only hope was when we got to here that all the money had been reinvested back in the sport, so the sport would grow bigger instead of, taken out by the promoters.
How was the UFC run pre-Zuffa, which is when you were there? What's different, not that you were there post-Zuffa, but what's different now, or what do you see different now?
It's just a different culture. Just a very different culture. Bob Meyerowitz, the old owner, he was from the music world. So it's very much, the talent, the band, he got the whole star development and building process. So, he was able to create some amazing and unique stars. This new generation, the Zuffa era, they bought a brand, and they're very focused on building the brand. The sport took second, the talent took second, because the brand became the most important thing. And then, when you move into a corporate, mindset like that, you just lose all that, that artistic freedom. And, that's what I saw. That's why I didn't sign with them. I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. How are they going to let the artists be artists? That doesn't make sense, because especially at that time, we were more art than sport. And I think you've seen us swing back. Now we're all art and no sport. Like, that's why Conor McGregor's so popular, is he's the most entertaining artist on the scene.
And why'd you end up leaving, you mentioned, after the Tito Ortiz fight? Could your career have gone longer, or did you just take a look at the business model and say, this isn't something that's consistent with the way I want to grow my brand or my career?
Well, it was purely strategic, my exit with Tito. And I'd actually exited before that, and that's how I was able to go around and fight everybody and sort of rebuild my, my awesomeness. But, when Tito then started to rise into popularity, there was no real, test for him, or there was no real superstar to kind of move him to the next level. And that was me, and I'd kind of retired. But I very strategically did that. When I signed the contract, I actually signed a 3-fight contract with the UFC, but I put in, if I renounce this championship and retire, then the rest of this contract is null and void, and I become a free agent. But my whole plan was to show up, beat Tito, become a free agent, and then, try to start my own league and kind of branch out, as a, higher level athlete, because I'd maxed out everything. I maxed out the pay scales. I'd maxed out, at that time, my acting, like there was, I'd maxed everything out inside the industry, the way it was built. So I felt like I had to, reshift and kind of rebuild my own thing, or I was going to be an old fighter guy.
And did the company present it to you that way? In other words, you had your time, you're this great champion, this living legend, now we're going to have you pass the torch. Or was it kind of your decision, or was it just natural?
It's just natural. I didn't see what was happening at the time, but I could feel it. I could feel that's what the fans wanted. And then I could feel, even though I beat Tito, I could feel that a lot of people wanted Tito to win. Because a new generation had come. It was a different feeling. I was the old school guy. But nothing, mechanical happened. I think it was just purely organic. But the same thing happened when I fought Nick Diaz at the last fight of my career. I could tell. People were like, he's the new guy. You're the old guy. The crowd, there was my crowd in San Jose, and they were telling me, listen, man, we like him now. So I think a lot of it's just organic.
And since you left the UFC, you never seem to have mended fences. Many of your contemporaries with far less significant impacts on the sport have been inducted in the Hall of Fame and other such things. Why do you think you've been kept out thus far?
Oh, I think purely personal. I didn't, when I bought the UFC, they hired me, to go train them and consult them. And I lived in the casino and I trained, Dana and Lorenzo. And, I told them everything I knew about the sport because I believed they would have the best interest of the sport in mind. And then, I tried to move that relationship further. And, the stuff they brought me back was not like move the sport forward. It was, shine it up, make the brand sexy and we're going to, roll it out. And that didn't make sense to me because I had been the spokesman for the brand for a long time. And I could tell the brand was damaged, in society's view of it. So it just didn't make sense. It looked like a big money pit. And then the minute I said, no, I don't think that's the right direction, they were like, you're out. So they just had their mindset. They had their machine built. And I, quite organically got on the outside just because I didn't believe in that vision. It didn't make sense to me, the money spent, the rebrand. I thought it was too soon. I thought it needed more time. So we ended up on different sides of the fence. And then, from then forward, Dana's a real adversarial person if you're not on his team. And I'm a world champion fighter. So, I'm not going to let anybody mess with me. Or I don't need other stuff in my life to make me feel good. So, I've always just stood my ground. It's what I believe in. I believe the artist should be cared for. I believe the sport should be cared for. I think we have a higher purpose to society in this athletic endeavor. And I think if we get away from those things and get away from the martial arts, I don't think we're going to grow and continue to receive the success and I don't think the children are going to show up is the bottom line if we don't, change our messaging and grow up a little bit.
And why don't you think that growing the UFC with that traditional corporate culture was beneficial to the sport at the time or even now?
Well, now it's hugely beneficial. At the time, it was not. And what needed to be done to then readjust the sport and fall into that model was a lot of unpleasant, business practices. So unfortunately, what needed to transpire to remold this industry into what they wanted, unfortunately, the fighters lost, the talent lost, and then sport lost at the end. There should be a massive, it's been 20 years, there should be a huge, national connected amateur league, that's being supported and promoted by the UFC because they're the largest entity and they have the most to gain from hundreds of mixed martial artists becoming superstars. But I was there testifying in front of the commissions and not one of these people ever raised their hand, but they all took millions off the top and they all drive, wonderful cars and they all are uber wealthy. But, the athletes are not, and the sport is not, and the amateur people are not. And that, that was wrong, and that should have been corrected. And that's why I didn't join that team, because that is what it seemed like they were going to do, and then that's what they did.
But the team that you did join, ultimately, you came back, were away for a few years, came back with Strikeforce. You were away from the game for a long time at that point. What about Strikeforce made you come back?
Well, it was Scott Coker and his, willingness to step in with a fresh voice and to try, to give the game back to the talent. I mean, it was him and I sitting down at Pete's Coffee, talking about matches that would have, infinite impact and value to the brand. That's never a conversation I've had with any promoter. Scott was like, "Hey, what's the story? Like, who we fighting?" He was very much a, give the artist the ball and let him perform. And, as soon as the UFC made the big shifts into a corporate, oversight structure, that artist thing became extremely, popular again. And people realized, wow, I lost all my chi here, and I don't, I'm performing, I don't really want to, and I'm hurt. And Strikeforce was kind of it was the alternative to this, locked up structure. And that's why guys perform. That's why I performed. I blew my knee out, 2 weeks before fighting Phil Baroni with no knee tendons, like wheelchair dude. And I went in and performed because to me it was bigger than that moment. It was about the sport. It was about, the opportunity to elevate the sport, to elevate us on television. So, you got to create a culture that artists want to perform. And that's what Strikeforce was.
And you mentioned Scott Coker. What do you think companies like Bellator and other smaller organizations have to do to compete with the UFC long term? Is it possible?
I don't know if it's possible. I think there's plenty of viable market shares in certain markets, but I don't think anybody, I don't think anybody's going to get ahead of the NBA, the NFL, or the UFC.
And would an amateur league help with that in some way, or an amateur organizing body or some other sanctioning body that can regulate the sport and the fighters as they come up rather than when they're finished products, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a tremendous investment that would be absolutely minimal and would pay off so many dividends. I mean, I was the first ever Mexican-American champion in the UFC. Like, the ability to, make this a really awesome American sport is like sitting right here, and, everyone's just kind of stepping over it. Yeah, we need to be creating stars. We need to be creating continual steady safety measures, updating the rules, updating, the training technique. But we need to be sharing this. To me, it's a social, experience. If we all trained in martial arts, imagine how much quicker our society would be and how much better, and there'd be a lot more value to it.
And I asked so many fighters about this, and everybody has different opinions. Would a union help? I suppose it's not really possible unless you got some of the bigger stars to join, and then they don't want to join because then they risk their upside. Is it possible? Is it something that's realistic?
I think it's done. I don't think we'll ever get a union. I think we missed that boat. I don't think we'll ever have pension. I think we missed that boat. Yeah, I went and testified to the Senate and tried to get, the Muhammad Ali Act to cover mixed martial arts because we have there's no oversight. They can pretty much do whatever they want, and you as a talent have no, understanding of that, ability to, monetize that past what you're getting paid to go fight. And I've been in the Screen Actors Guild since 1999, and, it's a real organization that protects their people because, promoters and productions and, these things, they're in a position to take advantage of people. There has to be some type of oversight. And I don't know what that is anymore. They've defeated everything. So that's why I don't know, nor do I think, we can get any protection past this point.
Why do you say it's too late now?
I think now the players are too big and the stakes are too big and all the other stuff has been defeated. Nobody wants to go wade in there and lose again. And everybody that stepped up has been volunteers and people that were like, wow, this seems like a really bad idea for these athletes. And, unfortunately, money, power, and legislation has crushed all those, goodwill efforts. So I just don't see enough money for anyone to go, hey, we should help these people because, now there's no money to help, to spend. So.
Now, you've also been very successful in your transitions to broadcasting, coaching, acting. What led you to undertake those endeavors? Why are some fighters unable to transition in that way?
Yeah, it's purely, for me, it was survival and success. I wanted to build a massive brand, could do things, influence things, and we could monetize it. And I needed to provide for my family. So, as I went on this journey, I first tried to become the best fighter in the world, and there wasn't enough money. So then I would teach on the side, and that was my extra income. And then, as the money grew, I continued to teach, and that is what developed my skill set in speaking, because I wasn't a good speaker before that. And then, it just became opportunity. They offer you a ton of money to show up and broadcast and to try that role. For me, that's an opportunity to expand my brand and, not get beat up. I was always trying to exit this sport into something else that would not get me beat up, because, the body has a limited lifespan, and, only those that, that respect that can exit this sport. Otherwise, your body's used up before you've made the right plans or you've made or gathered the next skill set. So for me, I was always going to exit this, become a Hollywood movie star, and then ride off into the sunset in Malibu. So I just kept that goal in mind. And then, I only fought when it was the right fight, with good money at the right time, when I was healthy, unless I couldn't avoid it. I carefully managed the whole thing because it seemed insane, and it seemed like at any moment, you could get really hurt or die. And for many years, it seemed like at any moment they could shut the sport down and we were just done. So there was a lot of planning and careful consideration on all this stuff.
And as a guy that at one point arguably was the biggest star in the sport, what are your thoughts on Conor McGregor, these recent issues outside of the ring, the way he's acting, all this conduct? Any thoughts on that?
It's an exact product of where we are. I wouldn't expect anything less. It's sad, and it's sad because he represents our sport. Much like Dana used to represent our sport. He now represents our sport. And as spoken from one who used to represent the sport, gosh, it's really nice when it's painted in a good light and it's a good social message. He's just pushing back against these machines, and the machines are there to monetize, to direct him in certain actions. And the problem with being an artist is when people try to control you and tell you what to do and go outside your art form. It makes you uncomfortable. So I don't particularly like what he's doing, but I can't blame him. I think he's a product of what this sport truly is.
And you mentioned it earlier. You said, look, we're at a point now where the stars have to look out for themselves only and only focus on their brand. It can be argued that that's what he's doing. He's taking his career into his own hands. It seems like he's a guy that the company is kind of following, and they can get rid of him, and if they try, they're not going to have anybody to follow up. So you can't really blame him, all things considered.
Yeah, no, he's just monetizing the opportunity. But look how crazy it is. And this is a byproduct of not building the right systems, caring for the talent, making them feel supported. There's no reason he should be doing those things and or having these type of social arguments or confrontation like this. It's just crazy. There's no real long-term value in it except what he gets to cash in at the box office. And, it's kind of sad.
And in fact, it can be argued that the long-term effects are negative. If kids are watching this and parents are watching this, they're not going to want to have their kids partake in the sport. As somebody with no martial arts background at all, it just seems that way from the outside looking in.
Yeah, why would anybody send their child to that? It's just, unless they just are interested in making tons of money, and that's a whole other message. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Now, this may have been something you touched upon earlier. Can you explain a bit further what you mean when you say that you live by the Warrior's Code or the Shamrock Way? Why is that so important to you?
Sure. Well, I'm a product of my environment, the universe, like everything that's happened to me. And when I was 18, I woke up in prison. I was like, wow, I've literally screwed my whole life up. Like, I messed my entire life up. And there was plenty of people that told me what I was doing was wrong, and plenty of people that stepped up to support me. But it was at that time that I made some decisions. And the first one was to live the best life that I could and to fix what I'd done. And to me, that's one of the core tenets of being a warrior. You decide to stand up and do something of extreme value and importance to your community. And I had my moment, and I went, wow, I got to change it. And I went to school, and I just changed my entire mind. I got educated, I changed my body, I lifted weights. And then, at the end of that journey, fighting came along. And, I saw that as a sign. Wow, like, this is my childhood dream that I've done no preparation for, and it's now right in front of me. If I accept this path, all my dreams can come true. And I believe that, and I took that acceptance. What I call, I swung the sword. Like, I literally picked up a sword. And then throughout this journey, I've learned about honor and respect and discipline. And, I've learned and created an entire system to manage my life and to manage my community and my family and my finances and my success. It all comes from this martial arts culture and these, principles of martial arts, which I realize are principles of humanity. If you're living a good life, if you're, honoring those around you, if you're grateful for what you have, like if you're serving, if you're filling all these buckets in your life, all the success you need and all the success you want is there. You'll be fulfilling your life. And what I've started doing now is sharing it. For many years, I just wrote notebooks and I just, documented what was going on. But in the past decade, I've been doing a lot of coaching, both with executives and with teams and individuals and CEOs and even down to kids. And I realized there's just core principles in your life that you need to adhere to, that you need to look after. And those deal with your mind, body, and spirit. And when those things are in order, you literally become this unstoppable machine of energy. And, you can direct it anywhere you want, good, bad, value, no value. The Shamrock way is about what Bob Shamrock taught me. We're all one unit. We're all a family, and how can we be the best in that unit? How can we be the best for our community, our society, and then larger in the world? Because if we're not, then we're just taking up space. And that's not what a warrior does. A warrior's out on the front line, standing up, securing things, protecting and guiding. And that's what I want to be. That's what I want to lead people to be, because I feel so amazing after this journey. And I feel so empowered with the knowledge that I have. And so in these speeches and in my coaching, I'm just bringing all this stuff out and sharing it with people. And it's been life-changing. Like, people are just blown away by the simplicity of it, and then also by the value of it, because it does take a lot of courage to live that life and to follow all of your dreams. But through this Warriors Code, a lot of people are picking up the sword, as you say, and just keep going.
Frank, it's been so great of you to join us. Where can people go to find out more about you, where to reach you, where to find out about your upcoming events or appearances?
FrankShamrock.com is my home, and then I am at Frank Shamrock everywhere else, except for YouTube, where I am the Frank Shamrock. But I'm real big on Instagram right now. I'm trying to blow up my Instagram account, so follow me there and you'll see my crazy life and teachings and some trainings and other fun stuff.
Understood. Frank, once again, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Right on. Thanks, brother.